I think what it is about photography that moves people so profoundly, I mean, it's connection. This ability photography has to put the viewer into a scenario, into an issue through an eye-to-eye visual connection with people who are impacted by it, people who are affected by it. I'm really trying to take a step back and look at things less like a traditional photojournalist and more like someone who is trying to look at how places perceive each other. And I do a lot of education these days. I do a lot of speaking to middle school classrooms. I often start by saying, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say Africa? And you know, the hands shoot up and people always say poverty and water scarcity and lack of food and dry heat, and then they say the Lion King and safaris and things like that. I had one classroom recently where the very first thing that was said was just the word bad. I feel like I'm someone who at first was sort of drawn in to that narrative that exists. When I became a Peace Corps volunteer, I said, yes, you know, sign me up, I'll put Africa top of my list. Presumably they need the help the most. And you know, I'm basing that off of what I had seen before. And then once I got there and was working as a photographer in addition to a volunteer, I started to feed that narrative. Instead of photographing rural African life as I was seeing it in front of me, I found myself photographing it as I had seen it photographed before. It's a narrative of Africa that we have that it's not that it's not true, it's that it lacks any sort of context. And so I think my work now through projects like Everyday Africa is to try to escape that very narrow vision that I used to have and try to provide some of that context that's desperately lacking. You know, Everyday Africa has since become a large project. There are about 20 photographers that regularly contribute to the feed. You've got a photograph of Nana Kofi Akwa, one of our Ghanaian photographers, taking a very sweet photo of his children. And then you've got someone else photographing the behind the scenes at a wedding, and these things that are very kind of relatable for a viewer anywhere in the world. And then when you suddenly hit a photo of, you know, Ebola, I find that you're able to connect with that photo much more so than when you would if you were in a sort of traditional way of viewing photojournalism. When we look at these things in a traditional way, it's often very stark and very, you know, everything's edited down to those sort of negative images, and you kind of get this feeling like it might have all have happened on Mars. To see it in that sort of stream, when you're seeing also very familiar things, we're actually able to have more empathy with them and more familiarity to them and have them be more impactful. The people who participate in Everyday Africa, the key is that they're people I trust. There's no central curation. They understand the project. We let them go, but it's been an early goal to embrace various viewpoints of what Everyday Africa means. One of the ways we do that is to repost hashtagged Everyday Africa material onto our feed. And you can actually search it by country very easily. The biggest surprise of Everyday Africa, it's just this snowball effect that it's had. I mean, you're talking about two guys that basically made a lot of photos on their phones and then got back and put it up as a Facebook album, and that was sort of it. As soon as we started a Tumblr and an Instagram, we immediately had other people asking to get involved, and then it wasn't long before we started to see the other feeds, the other worldwide missions to attack visual stereotypes in their own regions. And at this point, it has just become this global phenomenon, from very locally based, even neighborhood-based ones or city-based ones, up to continents. And now we're starting to see issue-based everyday accounts, and we never could have guessed 2.5 years ago that this is where we would be now. For me, the key word that always comes up is sincerity, and it's a tough word to define, but I think in terms of being a journalist, it sort of means trying to cover faraway places in the same way that you would your own backyard, and that's not always easy to do, but that's what we should be striving for.